some bad news on the eve of the introduction of the new Porsche 911 GT3. See, Porsche is not in business to make 911s. Porsche, like every other company in a capitalist world, is in business to make money. Luckily for us, Porsche can still make money by producing 911s. But, and here's some even more bad news, the 911 is increasingly stuck between the brand's promise of a pure sports car and the economic reality of needing it to appeal to the old men who have money to pay for them. And those old men, they want luxury cars. Which is why, as the 911 edges nearer and nearer a rear-engine Panamera coupe, it's the GT models that have gradually taken over as the 911's image maker. Simultaneously, the difference between the standard 911 Carrera cars and the GT cars has grown and grown and grown. And the 911 GT3 has grown to the point where it is the single most important car in the entire Porsche lineup, at least as far as I'm concerned. Let's get one thing straight. Committees make terrible cars. A committee made the Pontiac Aztek, notable within GM for hitting all of its targets, and on time too. Well, targets and timelines don't make a compelling product. It may be fun to look at now, but the Aztek cost GM millions. On the flip side, almost all legendary cars have been the work and vision of one person who understood their market. I'm talking about people like Bugatti, Ferrari, Honda, Gordon Murray, and a beanpole of a German guy you've probably never heard of named Andreas Preuninger. Andy Preuninger runs the GT car division within Porsche, and that's part of the Motorsports department. And it's their job to take whatever 911 Porsche turns out, no matter how fat and full of German technological innovations, and turn it back into the car that we all think of when we think of 911s. And that gap is growing larger and larger. For the 992, Andy's team was able to ditch the entire front strut suspension and replace it with double wishbones. This is not a tuning change. This is a wholesale rethink of the front end of a Porsche 911. And by the way, it's something we've never seen before. You'll see this at the back end of a car. For example, Volkswagen Jetta, the cheap versions get a torsion beam rear suspension. The more expensive GLI gets a multi-link. But we don't see those kind of changes at the front of a car because it's massive. This signals a sea change, a time where the GT3 starts to dictate the whole 911 experience and not the other way around. And so I think it's time for us to take a look back at the GT3 and where the entire name came from. The GT3 was born with the 996 generation when Porsche decided to abandon competition in the GT2 racing class where the 993 GT2 had competed. Because the Germans are so creative, these cars are named exactly the same as the racing class in which they compete. And in racing, don't forget, the lower the number, the higher the performance, which is why Formula One is at the top. In Porsche speak, GT2 cars are turbocharged, GT3s are naturally aspirated. The 996 GT3 used the famed Metzger engine from the 993 GT2 and the GT1 Le Mans car, just minus the turbos and tweaked to rev to 8,200 RPM. The GT3 wasn't actually meant to be a thing, it was just a homologation requirement. To race in the GT3 class, Porsche had to build some road cars in the race car spec. Those GT3s had no back seat, sunroof, air conditioning, rear speakers or sound deadening, and they were sold as a lightweight track special. Somewhat later, the GT3 race car needed some additional tweaks to be competitive, and to homologate those upgrades, Porsche had to sell 200 upgraded cars for the street. That is this thing, the GT3 RS. RS in German means Rennsport, or racing. Those Germans are so creative because this had the upgrades the race car needed. But rather than just slip those upgrades in unnoticed, Andy decided to make a thing out of it. A thing with a wing. The RS got a carbon fiber hood and plastic rear window for weight savings, a big wing, and carbon ceramic brakes. Pretty heady stuff for back in the day. As was the case with the original Carrera 27 RS, Porsche's marketing people didn't think anyone would want this car. In fact, they were concerned they wouldn't be able to sell the 200 required for homologation. But once the order books opened up, the orders started flying in by the rear engine boatload, and Porsche made as many of this as they possibly could, but they had to pull the plug after like 670 units because all of the tooling for the special parts wore out. It was only designed to make 200. The next generation of 911 was the 997, and following the surprise success of the first GT3, Porsche smelled an opportunity and made another one. Though the basic GT3 carried over the 996's lightweight formula, adding in center-lock wheels, it started out with that famed 3.6-liter Metzger, which then climbed to 3.8, and then eventually to 4 liters, which was the biggest engine ever put in a road-going factory 911. This time, AP reserved a special treat for the RS. It was based on the Carrera 4 wide body, giving it 2.5 inches of extra width. The engine revved to 8,500 RPM. Are you detecting a theme? And it made 500 horsepower from just 4 liters. The steering, perfect. The brakes, perfect. The shifter, perfect. The chassis balance, perfect. Or at least as perfect as you can get without computer-controlled trickery. And that engine? This was a fizzing, violent send-off to that magnificent Metzger. This is 911 distilled to its core, with no sacrifices for creature comforts. But more than that, it's not just any 911. It's one of the best driving cars of all time, ever. The Nissan GT-R beat the GT3's lap time on Porsche's turf at the Nürburgring, and, well, let's just say that didn't go unnoticed by the GT team in Weissach. Porsche declared war on Nissan, and this was the GT-R's H-bomb. Known to the outside world as the GT2 RS, it was effectively a GT3 RS with 2 turbos slapped on the back. Internally, it was known as Project 727, named after the GT-R's lap time, 7 minutes, 27 seconds, which Porsche was hell-bent on beating. The twin-turbo 3.6 made 620 horsepower, good for 205 miles an hour, and it kissed the GT-R in its 727 Auf Wiedersehen with a lap time of 7:18. What a fitting, happy ending for the second generation of water-cooled 911. It was replaced by the stunning 991, and when its GT3 arrived, well, it arrived with a bunch of flaming pitchforks. See, the 991 GT3 was the first GT car not to use the Metzger engine. It had its own new flat six. It also had electric power steering, which on the base 911 sucked. To add insult to that injury, GT3 also had rear-wheel steering. Oh, and there was no manual transmission. For the first time, the GT car's pursuit of speed meant technologies that implied a reduction in involvement. The people revolted. I was one of them. Andy fired back, "Shut up and drive the thing!" And so I did. And on track, man, he was right. The 991 was a completely worthy follow-up to all the previous GT3s. It was magic. AP's team fixed the 991's terrible steering. The engine pulled like a monster to 9,000 RPM, making some of the most insane sounds ever from a street car engine. Its chassis was perfect. You never noticed the rear steer or the PDK. Fact is, the 991 GT3 disappeared under you and let you concentrate on driving, exactly the way any race car should. Electric gizmos or not. Still needs a manual. Look, I was lucky enough to have a very heated debate with Andy Preuninger about this. And I like to think I won that debate mostly because I stunned him into silence by likening a driver's preference for transmission to sexual orientation. Let's assume for a second you're into the ladies. Someone could spend hours reciting all of the logical, rational reasons why you should want to sleep with Ryan Reynolds. He's so funny. He's so talented. He looks just like that Jason Cammisa guy. All of that is true, but none of it matters. The Germans keep doing the same thing to us with their dual clutch automatics. I don't care what gear it's in. I don't really care how quickly it shifts. I'm just not into it. Yanking on a paddle ain't gonna lock my torque converter, if you know what I mean. The fact is, you're into what you're into, and it ain't up for discussion. In Andy's defense, there had only been enough budget to develop one transmission for the GT3, and as an offshoot of the Motorsport division, the GT team knew the PDK would be quicker around a track, so the automatic won. The screams for the manual transmission from around the world were just as loud as the cries for fast lap times. A committee of bean counters might have never understood this subtle difference. But Andy's a car guy, and he realized that there are two different buyers for the GT cars. One for whom the cars just need to be outrageously fast, which of course they already were, and another for whom, so long as the cars are fast enough, will accept no sacrifice at all for involvement. And thus the 911R was born for those in the latter camp. It was basically a parts bin special, GT3 narrow body with the GT3 RS's engine, polycarbonate windows, and a magnesium roof, without the spoilers and with a manual. Once again, Porsche's marketing department didn't think anyone would care, and didn't think Porsche would be able to sell more than 500 of these worldwide. So they came up with the harebrained idea to offer the 500 911Rs to the 918 rich people who had bought 918 Spyders, hoping half of them would take the bait. Well, unfortunately, almost all of them bought one, and that created quite the problem. Porsche was forced to make another run of almost 500, which was the most they could do before the factory had to shut down for the upcoming model changeover, and even that didn't come close to meeting demand. The 911R was trading at 2 times its sticker price before the first one even left the production line. And guess who didn't make that money? Yep, Porsche. Way to go, bean counters. The 911R had 2 very distinct jobs. Firstly, it shut the committee up and told the marketing people to go back to their cubicles and leave Andy alone. And number 2, it paid for the development of a new manual transmission that he could then use in other cars. Andy is a genius. From here on out, the 911 GT car lineup would be split between the cars that prioritize the experience, like the GT3 Touring, and those that were all-out lap time machines. Like this one. That slight oversimplification allows for lap time champions like this, the 991.2 GT2 RS. Turbocharged to 700 horsepower with all of the GT car suspension tricks, nobody complained about it not having a manual. Certainly not when it beat that old 727 lap time by 40 seconds. That is a production car lap record, one of many. The GT2 basically set a lap record everywhere it went, and this isn't a numb numbers generator. It does trade some of the naturally aspirated drama for speed, but then it adds so much more speed that creates its own drama. This car was conceived and engineered before the successes of the GT3 Touring and the 911R had really sank in, to say nothing of the mid-engine cars, the GT4 and the Spider. So I really think this will be the last GT car before Andy and his team get carte blanche to do whatever they want, like replace the entire front suspension in a car. Because while it's Porsche's job to make money, and it's the 911's job to suck that money out of the pockets of old men, it's Andy and his team's job to make the 911s we really want. And the 911s we really want all say GT on the back. Okay, so you're just gonna keep the Ferrari framed out the entire time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Action.
I'm not some rich YouTuber asking you to like and subscribe. Hey, up, keep the Ferrari out. I'm an automotive journalist asking you to like and subscribe. And that's because that's how YouTube works. If you don't click those buttons, YouTube doesn't know you liked what you've just seen and isn't gonna show you any more of it. And if you don't like what you've just seen, well, join the club. And by that, I mean the Haggerty Drivers Club, which gets you access to this award-winning magazine, as well as discounts on amazing stuff. And if you still don't like what you've seen, well, then just leave a nasty comment because that's how the internet works. I need to go clean that up.